Hey everyone, thanks for coming back to the Orion Training Group YouTube channel. We're very excited to bring you a special video today. It's a lot of fun filming the shooting portion, but before we jump into the cool stuff, we need to give you the full context and make sure that you really understand what it is that you're watching. Any sort of CQB or close quarters battle or anything like that has a lot of nuance. There's a lot of small things in it that matter, and if we don't talk about those little things, you'll be left missing some context. The reason that we harp on context here is that even our cadre is made up of people with a lot of different backgrounds and experiences. We have people from the Marine Corps, from the Air Force, from law enforcement, from NSW, and although different backgrounds inform their opinions and their preferences, because experience is important. And if we don't show you multiple methods to get into a room and we just teach you the one that we think is cool or that is the best, we would be doing you sort of a disservice. So in this video today, we're going to talk about a lot of things. Now, before we jump into that, I want to thank the biggest sponsor of the channel, which is Texas Loot. We are powered by Texas Loot. If you go to their website and use the discount code SQUATS, that'll give you free shipping. SQUATS, SQUATS. That's a joke about my ass. But it's important that you remember that code, because if you go there and you buy stuff, that's great, but they won't know it was because of me. And then I'll be very sad because they'll say, why is no one using your discount code? So do yourself a favor, get it at a discount, do me a favor, and make sure that Texas Loot knows that I continually speak on their behalf. They carry things like Ferro, which we love, the FCPC V5 and all the other things that they carry from Ferro. They have the soft armor, they have the new radio pouch, all the cool stuff. So they have that. They're an FFL. They sell pretty much anything and everything you can think of in the genre of things that is on the YouTube that you're watching. Maybe this got suggested to you. Maybe you watched something from Grand Thumb or somebody else and it sent you over here, and now you know about Texas Loot. So keep building the network. Do us a favor and go over there and check it out. So without further ado, let's talk about the actual subject matter of the video. There's a difference between evaluating a room from the outside, or what a lot of places will call a threshold assessment, and then actually getting into the room. If you get into the room without evaluating it from the outside, you'll often hear that called a dynamic entry. When we talk about dynamic tactics and deliberate tactics, those are whole systems of tactics. But when we talk about just how to deal with a single room, sometimes we're talking more about movement, and people want to label it as a tactic and whatever else. So let's get all of the semantics out of the way. What we're talking about today is a two-man limited penetration entry of a center-fed room. When I say center-fed, it means that the door is in the center of the wall in which it resides, relatively speaking, to the corners, right? So if you look at the board, all of these little example rooms are set up just like the tape house that we built outside earlier and shot in. You'll hear terms like tape house, glass house, things like that. All that means is that you're using the outline of a floor plan to rehearse movement without having to be in a real structure. The benefit of something like a tape house is that you could do it in your garage here, not live fire, and get those movements down. Or you can do like Mitchell and I did and go out into, onto a flat range, set up a house and practice the fundamentals of CQB live fire, and not have to have found some sort of live fire facility that's got absorbent walls and bullet traps and all that stuff. So it's a great way to train and vet skill sets and build confidence without being high cost or really even needing anything special. For our tape house, as I said before, it was a center-fed room, single target in the center. The reason we kept it the same in every rep is to show you demonstrable differences in the application of all those techniques. So the first two right here are types of panning. Panning, if you watch our other videos, that's going to be up here for you to click on, talks about moving around the threshold in a smooth motion. And one of the concepts around that is not stopping to engage. And if you do stop to engage, getting into the room. So we'll talk about double panning. We'll talk about you catch it, you clean it. Those are two different methods. We're also going to talk about center checking. There was a time when I liked to describe center checking as a threshold assessment, but really what it is an entry method. There's no stopping or changing of momentum, and you're being carried into the room as you do whatever it is you're doing. And there's a lot of reasons teams don't use center checking for that, that the problems presented by that. We'll talk about that more in detail. And then, of course, there's just the straight-up dynamic entry methods, path of least resistance, or POLR. Some people call that flowing, and then button hooking. And we're going to go into detail on all of it. So for the purposes of the video, the first man in will be blue. The second man in will be yellow. And I'll be moving these magnets around and talking about things. And then as we go, I'm going to use different colored markers. The Army and some other DoD schoolhouses use terms like red and green zones. So I'll use red and green zones to talk about sectors that are cleared before entry or during entry, and that'll be a little different on each video, because if we talk about what's cleared before entry, on a path of least resistance entry, it's a very small portion. So we'll talk about all that. We'll talk about collapsing sectors and all those other things, but I would honestly suggest that before you watch this video, you go back and watch a lot of our other videos, like the footwork on path of least resistance and Buttonhook, how to pan and pie, what's the responsibilities of the second man in the room, nonverbal signaling, priorities of work, and all those other things. So Mitch is going to link the playlist, and it's going to be a ton of information. It's probably 2 or 3 hours of footage, but here you are on YouTube already watching, a 45-minute or whatever this turns out to be video. You might as well go get the rest of that knowledge we're giving you for free. So frame your learning in this video as best you can with all that other context. And if you already know those things and you're a cool guy, whatever, go ahead and watch it. So we'll jump straight into the first thing, and you'll get to see this live later on. We're talking about double panning. For the purposes of making the video make sense, we're going to always start in a single stack on the left-hand side of the door. So this is where our 2 entry team members are located prior to conducting any sort of movement. What part of the room can they really see? Well, there's something called a deep corner and a far corner. This is their deep corner. Essentially what this means is, from the outside, looking into the room, this gentleman here, the blue guy, can see about this much, right? You can see a zone or like a ray into the room, almost like a slice of pie. FBI would call that a clue. Sometimes that's what they call it, pieing. So what part can he not see, or what's the red zone? Well, it's this deep corner and the space leading to it. And that is dead space is what they call it. It's a space in which a person could hide, okay? If he doesn't do anything else and he just went into the room, it's going to look like one of these 2 entries. But the point of this deliberate movement is that he's going to work those angles and get to the far side of the door and create what they call a crisscross entry setup, all right? But what you don't see is we have this target here, okay? So as he starts to move and he works his way around and he starts to gain new angles, he's clearing what would have been a red zone and making it green. Once he gets squared onto this door and he sees this target in his zone and he engages it, he's got a couple options, right? I don't know about you guys. I'm not trying to stand in a door and fight completely silhouetted. We always hear that, clear the fatal funnel. It's the first step in the 5-step entry process in the Marine Corps' CQB handbook is clear the threshold. So we're not trying to have homie just stand here and fight in the door. He either needs to continue moving or he needs to get in that room and allow his second man to do work. Well, in this SOP or this method of double panning, we prioritize being outside the room and getting that second gun in the fight. Because consider that right now, all of this is still red zone. It's just still completely unknown, and math is hard, but that's about 50% of the room hasn't been seen. You want to run in there, or do you want to go ahead and keep working it from the outside? Depends on if you're a betting man or not, how you go. So let's just say that he starts to work back across. As he works his way to that far side of the door and he picks up new data, what has he dropped? What has he lost? Well, he's no longer seeing that target that he shot. And if that's that's a person that has presented a weapon with the intent to kill our blue man here, then you've just dropped the most important thing in the priority of work, which is a known threat person. So by this happening and that being dropped, we're sort of violating our priorities of work. But guess who's not doing anything right now? The guy in yellow. So he can very quickly, rapidly, with a minimized angle of exposure, pick that up and continue to hold it. So we're keeping that zone locked down as our blue guy continues to collapse his sector all the way over. And then what does this look like? We have seen pretty much 85% of the room prior to entry, okay? One thing that all of these methods are going to have in common is that once we've established this, there's someone who gets priority to enter. Typically that priority is going to be who has the most work or the most dangerous thing, or who saw the most of the room in an absence of an unequal threat. So you guys, you tell me, and we'll do it like Dora style, is the guy looking at some dead space or the guy looking at a dude with the gun have more priority? That's right. It could go either way. However, a lot of places are going to allow the guy who's got a gun on a threat to go first. But if he just runs into the room like so, Leroy Jenkins style, and never looks left or right, has he not violated safety and security, which are two of the core principles in CQB, he's not checking his deep corners. We haven't seen that red zone. So what do you guys think needs to be hit first? That's right, the corners. So I am of the preference that the guy holding on the dude with the gun goes in. Because the angle of the muzzle presentation of this blue guy is into this corner and this dude's in the center, he can go either direction. So typically, if you're in a crisscross, the fastest way to get into the room is for you to both follow the path of least resistance. So this gentleman moves into the right, hits his corner and whips back over, scanning his sector, hits his corner, whips back over, scanning his sector, and now there's nothing in this room that isn't green. And that's the very basic explanation of a double pan, okay? Well, what would look different if we did you catch it, you clean it style pan? Essentially what that means is when he does his initial assessment of the room, we almost just lost the board. He does his initial assessment of the room and he gets to that same engagement point that I talked about where he's worked all of this from the outside. He's worked his pie and then bang, now there's a engagement here, right? And he's centered up on the door. At this point, we're going to go ahead and enter. And teams that choose to use this do it because it's actually quite unnatural for a person to get into an engagement and then break off and continue to process well and move depth into another room. So there's a human behavior element to that. And there's also the element of if you've ever been on the receiving end of any kind of fire from that close, you're pushing gas and muzzle blasts into the room. It almost acts like a distraction device in the sense that we are being very violent at the door. Let's go ahead and ride that momentum into the room. Another reason is just from data, it's actually very rare to have more than one threat per room unless it's like a really heavy counter-terror situation. So a lot of LE teams have the rule of you catch it, you clean it, because 99 times out of 100, if you catch it, there's nothing else to catch in the room, but guess what we're still gonna do? Hit our corners. Now from here, if I'm in the center and I've already seen everything to the right, you guys tell me which way do you think it makes sense to go? To everything we know, relatively, other than this, or to the most unknown? And when I say most unknown, let's talk about what that means. Known, and we're going to pick it right back up. Unknown, but a really small amount. 40–50% of the room is unknown. That's right, he's probably going to want to go to the most unknown. And so he's going to enter, rolling into the room, hitting his corner, collapsing his sector, scanning it over. This guy's going to follow in right behind him, hitting his corner, collapsing his sector, scanning over to his buddy. So in this method, you enter with about 40% of the room uncleared, but you're riding the momentum of your shots in as you go. Okay? That's going to be a lot like center checking, except when we do center checking, it's known that the intent is to go straight into the room. So when you snap center, flash 12, 90 plus 10, center check, step center, all terms for the same maneuver, the idea is there is no pausing on the outside. It's an entry method. So just like when I step into a room to hit a corner, I'm stepping up to a room to see the center, and that allows my body to swing either way into the room as I go. So it's going to look the same as far as this goes on what we've seen of the room. From the outside, looking as deep as I can to the corner, this is about what I'm missing. Okay, I'm going to really rapidly swing out and check the center as fast as I can without losing my processing ability. That comes from training. And on engaging that target, I'm moving in to the left after engaging into that most unknown, which, what does that look like? just like you catch it, you clean it. And this guy, of course, is coming in and hitting that other dead space and collapsing. So really the only difference between catching it and cleaning it and just doing a center check is that one's intentional as an entry method, and the other one is a rapid response to stimulus of I shot and now I need to get in the room. One of the main things you're going to see, and you're going to see that in our demos later, is on a center check, if I'm the number 2 man and I know that our SOP for the team is to do center checks, when I launch that guy and give him a squeeze, my gun is not in the fight, because I know he's about to pass through that door. That squeeze was sending him into the door. He's just looking at the center first prior to entry. So my gun's not going to come up. But in the catch it, you clean it, when we give permission to the first man to come across, and he's here, yellow man's gun is up, but it's oriented to what? The most unknown that we have right now on this side of the room. And when this shooting happens, the yellow man has to open up that closed lane. He's got to say, oh, you got priority now, because whatever I'm looking at, this empty space, is not as important as the person you just engaged. And that these two things are just playing off of priority of work and also understanding the momentum and the fluidity that we're trying to actually enter the room, or we're trying to evaluate the room from the exterior. So that's two really important things on that. All right, last but not least, path of least resistance. I'm going to say it again in the live demos later, but if you're going to do these, you better have a really good reason, and you better have supporting elements. So if you're going to do a path of least resistance entry, let's talk about how much of the room we've been saying we've seen from the outside. Okay, that's red. Can't really see it. This is maybe a little green, right? Just the angle that I can see-ish coming out to my guy here. But guess what else is entirely red? The whole rest of the room. So, a couple of things to consider here. If I flow straight into the room, first man, right? Boom. I've broken the plane of the threshold. As soon as I see that this corner is clear, I'm going to begin collapsing my sector, because what's the next thing I want to look at? The center, which happens to be where the target is in this scenario. So doing a path of least resistance entry as the primary man flowing into the room is going to force your second man to button hook. Button hooking is a great technique, and you need to know how to do it, but you also need to understand that it's slower than anything else on this chart as far as the time you spend dwelling in the threshold, because you have to roll and pivot. Some schoolhouses, and I like this technique, teach you to square to the door just like a center check with your gun down, and you're going to roll straight into the room. The amount of time it takes this guy to get to the edge of the threshold, roll square to the door, and flow into the rear, while the first man hits the dead space, a little bit of dead space on his side, but guess what he's exposed to? All this. So by flowing in first, I'm really fast and I get a quick look to the center, and you'll see that on the video. I'm able to see my corner and see the center and shoot before Mitch is really even fully in the room, but that's only really looking good because the target was here. Okay? What if we bet wrong? CQB is a huge gamble. There is no secret sauce. There is no way to make it safe. What if we bet wrong? What if the target was here? Right? Forget the target being here. Homie in blue that had to go flow straight into the room, hit his corner, scan all the way over, that's not even in his sector of fire. And that's going to have to be for that yellow guy, that second guy, to pick up. So if the first man flows in, the second man has to button hook. That's just something to consider on economy of motion, how your body moves, and all those other things. Let's say the target is in the center. When's it getting engaged? After the corners are cleared. So there's an inherent time lag in here where corner, corner, center, check my buddy, and back. How fast can that really be? And how much reaction time does this guy have? When was his clock started? Did he hear us outside in the hallway? Is he prepped and ready, hide under a bed with a PKM? There's a lot of things we need to consider about taking the risk of entering the room blind, just looking at the data. Look at this, and look at this, as far as what's green. It's kind of a no-brainer there, right? But then we throw in things like, what if it's hostage rescue? What if you hit it with a 9-banger? What if you're in a trailer here, and you don't have the distance to be able to do panning because the hallway is 32 inches wide, and you're 32 inches wide, much less with a gun. So there's stuff you have to consider about, yeah, this isn't ideal, but I better be really good at it because when I have to do it, it's a pretty bad day. Okay? The next part we'll talk about will be if we were going to do another type of dynamic entry, but we're going to lead with the button hook. So that means the first guy in is going to the most unknown. Because remember, we have this little section here, right? We have this little section he can see here that's green. And what he does is he orients himself to hit this sector first. So yeah, if you're picturing that in your head and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? This guy is doing a 180, squaring to that door and rolling into it to hit this corner first. That sounds counterintuitive, right? He had dead space there. No matter which way he enters, his back's going to be to something. So why would we pick this? Why would we want a button hook first? That's right, because it means the second guy can just flow into the room. So if this guy is rolling and pushing 180 and doing the slower movement first, that means his back is covered sooner. So as the blue rolls in, the yellow can just shoot in to cover his back. So what's the good thing about the button hook first? If the target's in either corner, your corners are covered sooner. But what takes longer to get to the center? If I had to spend all that time button hooking and rolling and turning and showing my flank to the center, then hitting a corner and then scanning back, this is basically just a 90-degree movement when we flow in, right? I float in, boom, hit my corner, it's 90 degrees up to the other one. This is, I'm hitting my corner, which is a 180, and I'm going all the way back to the center, past it a little bit, so it's like a 270-degree movement, right? It's taking about 3 times as much time for the button hook guy to be able to get to the target. Unless he's, of course, really good at what he's doing, and those are just rough estimates of time. So consider that any one of these options sucks. CQB is really dangerous, and we're not teaching you how to survive per se. What we're trying to teach you is there is nuance and there is application and there is a reason to use each and every one of these, but you have to understand how to actually execute them and what the pros and cons of them all are. They all require a slightly different way of manipulating your body through the doorway, ways of moving your gun around, but it all comes down to very basic firearms handling skills. Accuracy is obviously critically important. One of the things we hear about a lot on deliberate movements or threshold assessment movements is how many shots can you really get off when you're panning? And Mitchell and I made the rule like, hey, we'll just shoot 2 or 3 times. But we'll have students come through classes that have never done deliberate movements, or they've done deliberate movements without any training. They're just emulating what they see. And they'll try to shoot 7 or 8 times, and they end up doing something like this. Instead of bang, bang, seeing it, and then continuing to work that near apex as they get to the far side of the door and collapse, what they end up doing is shooting, bang, bang, moving all the way to the far side and staying locked onto it. So now they're exposed to this dead space without looking at it, right? So if you're going to do a deliberate movement, it takes a lot of processing speed. It takes you really the ability to be dynamic from outside the threshold of I'm delivering shots and I'm quickly changing my priority to something other than what I just shot. So it's not that deliberate is slow. That's why we don't call it slow and deliberate. We have a whole other video on deliberate versus dynamic tactics. But it's done with NLTA and flashbangs in a shoothouse. This is a little different because it shows it to you with live stuff, okay? So again, just in summary, these are all slightly different. They all have slightly different nuances, but they're all valid, and they should all be used for, maybe some different reasons. But ultimately, they're all dangerous. None of it's life-saving. So before we get into the live demos that we've already filmed, and it's going to, cut to that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it again, and Mitchell and I are going to run through it again, just on the ground with, SWAT hands, talking about all these topics, showing you the why and how, and then you're going to get to see it run live from a first-person perspective and a bird's-eye view. Why are we going through so much trouble? Right? We've probably spent 6 hours today on this video. We're going through this much trouble because people don't always learn the same. And when you're teaching, it's on the instructor to make sure that the student can learn. If you have a student that says, like, I'm not getting it, and you have an instructor who says, well, that's because you suck, that instructor is typically a poor instructor. They're not taking the ownership to say that, well, I didn't provide you something in a format in which you could learn. You got print learners, visual learners, kinesthetic, people have to be hands-on and all that. So we've had a lot of requests for whiteboards. We started using whiteboards in classes now, and the reviews have gone up because there are people in class that learn that way. There's also people that need it to be demoed twice. They need you to talk them through it, walk them through it, and then watch you run it. There's also people that when they get on the catwalk, man, it clicks. Like, oh, the angles make sense. In the absence of a catwalk, we're using drone footage. So we're trying to show you 3 different ways with all the same explanations to hopefully help you learn it better, okay? Frankly, I don't know of anybody else out there doing it like we're doing it. So I really hope that you enjoy the rest of the video, and you know, you're going to hear my head talk a lot more, and then you'll get to see some bullets fly. So enjoy the rest. All right, guys, so you just saw, you missed your own hands. So we just saw all of that talking on the whiteboard, and I didn't even want to do that. That was Mitchell's idea, because frankly, some of y'all are retarded, and he knows that, and he wants to take care of you.
Because I myself am retarded.
Yeah, so everyone learns differently, right? And as instructors, we need to make sure that we try to provide as much types of learning as we can. Now, you're going to see this live on a GoPro in a minute. You're going to see it from overhead footage with a drone. It's going to be awesome, but we still want to give you that one more demo rep without just talking about it on a whiteboard. So you've seen it above, now you're going to see it at this level. First thing we're going to talk about is going to be double panning, which is the same thing that we started talking about in there. And just to refresh you, we're going to walk you through it. So Mitchell's behind me. He gives me that nonverbal indicator that it's time to move. Once I get that squeeze, I'm going to move fluidly around the outside of the door, trying to assess that, you know, 70, 80, 90% of the interior of the room. From here, the only thing I can't see is that deep corner. So I'm going to start working my angles. Once I get to a point where I see that target and I engage it, because of the SOP we're talking about, I'm going to continue on, which means I'm giving up a known threat. Remember, our highest thing in the priority of work is someone with a gun or someone that is a threat. For the purposes of the demo, that's this target. So bang, 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 and I keep moving, which tells Mitchell to pick it up, and I continue to collapse. Now, at this point, I'm in my launching position, and he has more priority than I do because I have dead space. What does he have? A person with a gun or a known threat target. So I give it to him, and I simply go the opposite direction that he goes. We both hit our corners, readdress the target if we need to, scan to a meter off our buddy, scan back, and if there's no more work, go to a safe high or low position and continue to address the target, which is outside the scope of what we're talking about. Super simple. So now you're going to see it live. Okay, so now we're going to talk about panning with a you catch it, you clean it sort of mentality. Essentially what that means, it's going to look the same, but when I get to that position where I engage the target, Mitchell is going to know, because of our SOP that I'm going to enter, what does that mean for his muzzle? Remember on the last video you watched, when I got to this point and I shot, I continued moving, which meant he continued to have priority to these angles. If our team is training for a you catch it, you clean it, basically meaning if we shoot, we get in the room, he can't have that gun down across that angle the whole time because it stops me from being able to get into the room. So what he has to do is remember that as soon as I shoot, his gun is out because I have priority to get in the room first. So it's going to look something like this. He gives me that nonverbal, bang, bang, his gun comes up, and I drive, in this situation, to the most unknown. Because remember, like we talked about on the whiteboard, if Mitchell is there and his gun is pointed into the room that way, go ahead and step out here for me, Mitch. His body, his orientation, his aggressiveness, he's projecting this direction. So if I shoot and he gives it to me and I go this way, it forces him to button hook into the room, which takes a little bit longer for me to get coverage on my back to that corner. Super simple. So now you're going to see that live. So the two methods you just saw were what we call a threshold assessment, meaning that our intention was never to just run into the room. We were trying to figure out what we had on the inside and get in there when it made sense based on our SOP. The next one's going to look similar, but there's going to be two main differences. For one thing, my footwork is trying to drive me in and give me momentum into the room in this technique that we call a center check. Also notice Mitchell's posture. Whenever he gives me that squeeze, his gun's never coming up, because we know from the jump with this technique that I'm getting into the room first. So it looks really similar to you catch it, you clean it. There's just no stopping and no change in momentum. When he gives me that squeeze, instead of working around the outside, trying to get in an arc around this room, I'm simply going to snap and pivot into the room without sticking my muzzle through the door frame, bang, bang, and then I'm moving. And at that point, there was never a time where we stopped our momentum. He never brought his gun down to close me off from being able to get in the room, because the SOP with that maneuver is that I'm simply getting a free look at the 12 o'clock before I dive in and expose my sides. So now you're gonna see that live. Okay, so we've done all the cool stuff. We've done all the hip modern stuff. We've done the panning, the different types. We've done the center checking. But what about good old-fashioned dynamic entry? Okay, this would be the kind of thing, and if you've watched other videos, you know I'm a huge fan of if we have dynamic supporting elements like a flashbang prepping this room before our entry, or a coordinated exterior breach, multiple breach points, breaking windows with breaking rakes or whatever else. So this is a great technique if, say it again, this is a great technique if you have all the other supporting elements. Like you saw on the whiteboard, what were we doing with the threshold assessment? We're reducing our unknowns to reduce our risk before entering. Well, if we're not doing that in a dynamic entry, we must be doing something else to change the chances of us getting popped when we make that entry. So first one we'll show you is if I flow into the room first. So I get that nonverbal, I'm literally just going to walk into the room, which is going to force him to turn around in the doorway. Again, a button hook, which is slower. So when I get the squeeze, I break the plane of the threshold, corner's clear, bang, 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 check on him. Think about the time it took him to turn, hit the corner, and come back around. So now you're going to see that live. So after you've just seen that where we have the button hook as a follow-up, what if we did a dynamic entry and we started with a button hook? One of the pros of that is that he's going to be a lot tighter on my back, because as I roll into this room, he can simply push the path of least resistance. Because remember, as you've seen in our other videos, we really want to make sure that we're going left and right into the rooms. If the first guy in goes left, the second guy goes right, nothing changes here. So when he gives me that nonverbal squeeze, I've already checked my deep corner. I'm driving to the corner opposite me, bang, 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 checking on him. He was way faster to cover that side than he was on the last rep you watched. So it's just something to consider. There's a lot of reasons that would drive us to do any one of these methods, and part of why we wanted to show you guys from up top so you can see it live, see the timing and all those things. So now you'll see that technique live. high, but they're still in the A zone. These two are out. These are technically the only two out of the A zone. So in conclusion, guys.
Man down.
Man down. In conclusion, he's very dead. You could do any one of these methods and you would be correct. You could do any one of these methods and you'd be wrong. There's environmental factors that you should consider when doing this in real life. Are we in a really tight trailer hallway, where I can't do deliberate movement? Is it a hostage rescue where I have to be quicker than taking all that time to protect me? So don't look at this as an instructional on do all of these 5 things because they're great. Look at it as a demo of how to do those 5 things well, and you need to understand how to do them and when to do them. That's the critical part. So I would say probably the best piece of advice would be take a class, not just from us. There's other great instructors out there teaching vetted tactics, like the Core Vision guys out in Washington. Our curriculums are like 90% similar. There's a lot of places where when they teach based on principles, what gets boiled out into the core essence of what they're doing, it looks the same. So take a class, get reps on this, get good vetted instruction that teaches you the how and the why, and not just, this is what I prefer because it's what I did 15 years ago when I was in. You have to make it make sense and make it principles based. So I hope you enjoyed it. This is one of my favorite things to teach, and doing it live fire really gives a serious sense to it. It's not just like, pew pew airsoft and shooting sims and whatever else. Don't do this with people you don't trust, okay? I trust Mitchell with my life, known him for years now, fantastic shooter, one of the best students we've ever had on the way, his ability to pick stuff up, repeat it immediately with high proficiency. So don't just go grab a bunch of bozos and do this in your backyard. Follow all the rules of firearm safety. Make sure that the people you're running with are of a high level of proficiency. With our members club, we didn't do this until they all had, 12 to 14 months of time training with us. And that's the real world look at it as well. You're not going into a live fire shoothouse with people you don't know. So find a group of people, train to a high level, and make it make sense when you build your SOP. So thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe. Share the video if you found value in it, training value, if you just thought it was cool. Small businesses like us only continue to exist if people talk about it and spread the word. So do your part and we'll keep doing ours. Thanks.